We have a question
Yes.
over here.
Well, okay, I'll just introduce myself by telling everyone that I'm an American citizen, also an Israeli citizen. I've lived in Israel for more than 36 years, and I felt that there were more than one moment during the film which were not represented, or, look, I understand that everyone has their narrative. And the narrative of the Druze who live in that part of Israel, or the Golan Heights, who identify with Syria, I understand that their narrative is very different from my narrative. But I do feel that there were some things in the film which were misleading, and I just want to give a few examples because
Please do.
I think that it's important for everyone to know.
Please do.
There was, in the beginning at some point, a comment about confiscating agricultural land if it's not used, if it's not cultivated. The law exists in Israel for all agricultural land. I live on a moshav, which is an agricultural moshav. If we do not cultivate our land will also be confiscated. So that is not something that is specific to Arabs or Druze living in any part of Israel.
But it's still relevant to. It's still truthful. You know.
But it is not selective because they are Arabs or Druze or Syrians. It is a law in the land of Israel that applies to everyone in the country, Jews also. And I just wanted to make it clear. I'm not saying that they don't. I understand.
Okay.
Can I just quickly do them?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
All right. The woman at the border that you mentioned, to me that seemed extremely staged. Because if she knows that she cannot cross the border, and she goes anyway, and she takes her children, and then she starts to scream because they're not going to let her cross, to me that's a situation that was extremely staged. She staged it. She knew she wasn't going to get across, and she took her children. She exposed her children to all of that wailing and anxiety. I looked at that as something that mothers don't do in front of their children, but
Yes, but it happens.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm saying it was staged. That's
Yes,
what
I
I'm
know.
saying.
To be logical in grief, I think, is you're not logical in grief.
This is the dilemma of the
The
director.
Druze in Israel have the option of becoming Israeli citizens. There was a statement that they were forced. Another way of presenting it would be to say they are offered Israeli citizenship. They
It
did
was
not.
trying to be forced on them in 81, 82, and they had a strike and they burnt the Israeli identities
Some
that they
chose
forced.
to take it,
Some chose
and
to take
some
it. Yeah.
chose not to take it. Obviously, that's a very political issue for them. And the only other thing that I think that I will just mention is, and it was mentioned by the one man who was tortured in Syria, that the Druze are a minority group wherever they live. And if they live in Syria, they're also a minority. And with all due respect for all of the, my dear president, you know, that they don't know how they would be treated if they lived in Syria today or in the past. And just now it was mentioned. At the very end of the film, it was talked about a little bit more related to, but okay, that's it.
And no, don't you think I thank you and appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
They live in the past?
Say that again to me.
Yes. Don't you think the Druze, the Golan Heights, live in the past?
I think it's an issue for a lot of cultures is in terms of living in the past. You know, I think every culture has issues with the past, and how do you incorporate that into life, into present life? You know, there's a certain amount that you should bring into it, but also you can't be living about what's in the past.
Okay. Okay.
In viewing the film, I felt that it didn't really represent all the Druze. It only represented maybe one village or one part of the Druze.
Yes.
Having visited Israel in the Golan Heights several times and visited Druze villages, I didn't get the sense that it was all bad living in Israel. And I felt this film was too one-sided.
I appreciate your comments. It was, I mean, by design, it was focused on one village. It's focused on one particular village.
Yes, but it's totally different.
It is one side. There, to be very clear about the
Yeah.
different Druze who live in Israel, and
yes, it's totally different.
there are Druze that are a little bit further south, or all in the north of Israel, that are Israeli citizens that were always part of Israel, and there's the Druze that are former Syrians, and that's what we're talking about here, who have a very different story. And that's what this movie was about.
Yes.
We did have another
Everything-
movie here about the other Druze. There's a comment over here.
Can you make a comparison between the troubles in Ireland and what you saw between the Israelis and the Druze?
Well, like, you know, when Shlomi asked about the past, you know, there's a lot of that in our culture is about how much do you keep remembering things that went on in the past. I live in the Republic of Ireland. We have had our independence since 1922. Now I've heard our situation in Ireland described as we're suffering from post-colonial adolescence. That's 90 odd years later. We're still suffering the effects of it. I suppose in terms of nationalism and identity, yes, there was parallels, and how one kind of our communities are kind of consolidated into expressions of nationalism. So I did find parallels there, and also how people are celebrated. You know, like the prisoner that was released, how communities are celebrated. Like where I was brought up was far away from the troubles that happened in Northern Ireland, which, you know, but you know, I was obviously I was obviously aware of them.
I want to suggest that part of their insistence on their loyalty to Syria may have to do with the prospect, admittedly remote, but nonetheless real, that the Golan may be returned to Syria someday. I mean, we recall that not in the too far distant past, even under Benjamin Netanyahu,
Yes.
there were serious efforts to reach an agreement with Syria, and I don't think that they would want to have been seen as traitors if the territory were to be returned to Syria. And I think that informs some of the zeal and the sort of outspokenness behind their
Absolutely.
demonstration.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. You know, again, there's a lot of pragmatism going on in it. You know, it's about kind of hedging bets and, you know, what's going to make the situation better for them, depending on what happens eventually in the future.
I can tell you that now in 2013, now the village, the Golan Heights, just divided between half of them support Assad and half of them oppose Assad. This is the situation now at this country, at these cities.
And the amount of young people actually taking Israeli citizenship now
Yes.
has gone up. It's into three-figure numbers for the first time ever. Because I suppose, you know, it's understandable that they're starting to give up hope. They're thinking like, do I really want to go back to that Syria? That's not necessarily that's not the homeland I want to go back to.
Mhm.
And they're kind of sick of living in a state of limbo, complete limbo.
Yes.
Absolutely. So they're kind of going, I want a life. You know, this is not my fight anymore. Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. They know nothing else,
Yes.
and that's why we focused on the grandfather trying to teach the grandchildren. Like in many ways, like it's hopeless. It's absolutely hopeless. But it's that's the issue that's going on there, is that there's he is trying desperately to teach this child about something that she's never going to have an appreciation of. It's going to be 55 years by the time she becomes. You know, it's a long time.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, hi. Druze have one of those laws or tradition that whatever the sovereignty is, they're loyal to it.
Loyalty.
And here they are kind of like neither here nor there. But the Israeli Druze are, most of them, if not all, very loyal, and they go to the army and whatever. are they have any influence? They're trying to. There's any communication regarding this issue?
No, I think that there is no connection between them. They are totally different. But they respect each other. Just that.
They respect each other because they believe in reincarnation, and they believe that when they die or when their father or grandfather dies, they could be reincarnated into a Druze in the Galilee, and then they could become soldiers. And they also they marry as well. They, like, not very often, but they marry between the Syrian Druze and the Israeli Druze.
I have seen film clips before of the Shouting Hill, and it's a very emotional and moving situation. But in this age of the internet, Skype, voicemail, FaceTime, and so on, I'm wondering if communications between Syrian Druze and Golan Druze has not improved. Did you see that? Did it make it to the cutting floor? Or what?
I've read that the Assad closed the internet in Syria.
Yeah, it's becoming more popular now. Like, yes, you're right. A lot of them communicate. Whereas it used to happen every Friday, it only happens on very rare occasions. And now we filmed one of the rare occasions, which is at a wedding or a funeral. That happens. But now everyday communication is done like that. But now presently, people are going again to the Shouting Hill because the communication links are after breaking down.
And Kate, my last question is, what is your next project?
We've just had 2 babies in the last 2 years, so that's kind of the project at the moment.
Project.
No going away to the Golan Heights for the next while.
Okay. The last question? Okay.
We were speculating on why the Syrians feel such loyalty to this regime. And 2 points that weren't raised that could be tentative things are, first of all, despite the atrocities of the Assad regime, they have a decent record on because the leadership are Alawites, which is an Islamic minority, and Druze are also an Islamic minority. So there's a sense that with the opposition being Sunni fundamentalist, for the most part, the armed opposition, there's a sense that amongst religious minorities in Syria in general, by that I mean Alawites, Druze, and Christians, that this regime is going to protect them against Sharia law, which would, would be bad for Christians and Jews, and would be catastrophic for Druze and Alawites because they actually don't have Christians have rights and Jews have some rights, less rights, but they have a place. Yes. But for the Druze and the Alawites, they're like heretics, from that point of view. So, and then also,
I think your loyalty is to survive, only to survive.
Yeah. And the other thing is, if you look at in one of the rallies, they had a picture of what's his name? No. Before Bashar, there was an important when Syria was under French occupation, there was this Druze revolt in a Druze town, and it quickly
Al-Trash,
yeah, and it quickly morphed into a Syrian revolt, a general Syrian revolt. It started as a Druze revolt against French trying to do something in their village, and then it became a whole revolt that removed the French out of Syria. And so that has given some Druze a sense of patriotism because of the connection there too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the statues that are in the town. There's 2 very definitive statues, and they commemorate that time.
And there's an effort on the part of the Assad regime to connect himself to this image.
Yes.
Even though there are different times, they put the pictures together to create this mental image.
Okay, thank you very much, and
Thank you very much
congratulations.
for
Thank you, Shlomi, and
Respect
thank you,
the,
Keith, for
your
being
next
here.
project.